Hello. If you're interested in the Roman way of war specifically, then I would read books by Flavius Vegetus on the Roman way of war, or the two most famous books by Tacitus, that is the um, Agricola and Germania. But I've covered this topic in other videos where I've talked expansively about the Bin Ladens and why the Roman way of war is applicable to our modern situation. Because there are feudalistic crime families above the demos in terms of power, and the demos is the elected governments and the legal structures and economic structures which we believe do run the world. And this is not completely true, you know. Other agencies that come from the demos, such as the CIA, do have a lot of power, but they don't run things. There are various feudalistic crime families, such as the Bin Ladens, such as the Saudis, vying for control against totalitarian regimes such as the Iranians and Chinese, who have some, and Russia, which has some ability to affect what's going on. But overall, the Western crime families have the most dominance, and their ability to influence the United States is halted to some extent by the CIA, because the CIA is a very powerful organisation, and also the United States controls all the sea lanes in the world. But and thus the oil supply. This is beginning to change with the emergence of a European common defence policy and common European armed forces, which de facto exists and is bigger than the United States. Also, the Chinese are trying to build a blue water navy, but how effective that will be is debatable. So there are also the strong lobbies of the Saudi lobby and the Israeli lobby, and the ability of Saudi Arabia and the Bin Laden family in particular, although Osama bin Laden has been killed, to affect Pakistani domestic policy, because there is a civil war going on in Pakistan, but Al Qaeda would like to get a hold of the nuclear weapons. So in those 3 minutes I've covered the broad range of what's going on, but I'm going to specifically talk about Afghanistan because of the way the Romans, if they were around today, would deal with Afghanistan. Afghanistan has no economic ties to the West other than the drugs trade, and that's the one thing that NATO has failed to control. When the Romans went into Gaul, they had already made Gaul dependent on Italy and the Roman sphere of influence. So Gaul was already within the Roman sphere of influence. That was half the job done. It allowed the Romans to build roads, and in our day we would say roads are important, but also air power is important, because of course the Romans didn't have air power. The control of the infrastructure of the country. We do not control the infrastructure of Afghanistan even after 10 years of war, because of course even where we have built roads, the Taliban and the Al Qaeda and the Haqqani network and the Pakistani ISI can destroy that infrastructure. Why can they destroy it? It's because they're not economically dependent and politically dependent on the occupying Western forces. And it is an occupation. Karzai has said is that he wants American bases in Afghanistan, and that's really just to secure his position. He came out of the Northern League and was in conflicts with the Taliban and other warlords in Afghanistan. So many commentators have said that it will revert either to being within the Pakistani influence, the Iranian influence, and thus China's influence, or because China is dependent on Iranian oil, or it will revert back to opium war economy, with warlords controlling the population through that. So we have to tackle the thorny issue of making the Afghans dependent on us for their economic futures, and that means buying up the opium crop and thus warehousing it and destroying it eventually. But can that happen? The Soviets did try to buy up opium and store it in their incursions into Afghanistan, but it led to corruption and the use of drugs by the Soviet army, which broke down discipline and eventually caused them to lose skirmishes with the Taliban, the Mujahideen as they were known, when they were supported by Al Qaeda and the CIA. Now the Romans would take a much more sophisticated, in my view of how to fight wars than we have taken at present. It is an incremental way of fighting wars, which the British learned from reading into classical history, used and developed themselves in Malaya. And that is to break the economic and social connections in Afghan society to the hierarchy which is forcing them to do what that hierarchy wants. That is the essence of power, to make somebody do something that they don't want to do. The problem with this is, of course, that Taliban and Al Qaeda kill people's families. And so how do we protect the civilian population? Or do we even protect them? In the Roman method of war, they would break those social connections and economic connections and attach those social and economic connections to the Roman army. They would give almost a humanitarian level of assistance in the first incursion. In the second incursion, if there was another rebellion, of which in Afghanistan in our situation there has been many, they would be absolutely ruthless. They would buy up salt, which is absolutely necessary to maintain the body's physiology. They would control the supply of salt. They would control the supply of fresh water by damming rivers and building forts there to control those. And in Afghanistan, there is very limited rural economic areas to control. It is a complex system of wadis and fields and fortified compounds, but the actual space which is able to be cultivated is reliant on the Helmand River system in the south and in other river systems in the north. The domination of the Helmand River thus is a strategic necessity for anyone who wants to control Afghanistan, because that's where most of the poppies and opium poppies are being cultivated, and most of the food. Now, Afghanistan is already dependent on the US for most of its food supplies. That's a good thing, because food can be used as a weapon against the Afghan people if they do rebel. And if they are playing on both sides with the Taliban and the rest, then we might want to take, albeit hypocritical for me, because I was against the concentration of people in camps for the Boer War. But in the present situation, we're talking about not people fighting for independence, but people who want to destroy our entire civilization through drugs, the control of the oil supply, and the use of planes as weapons to destroy buildings. And also they have links with the Western crime families and certain corrupt fifth columnists within the CIA.